Today on Call for Two, the Deadbolt Mystery Society. A spoiler-free mini review of 5 games and a look at what makes the Deadbolt Mystery Society system special. Are these games right for you? Stay tuned to find out. Some preliminaries first. This review will be purposefully vague and spoiler-free, but I'll try to give my recommendations and rankings of these games. I've played all 5 of these live on the channel. You can watch. The playthroughs range somewhere between 4 and 10 hours each. And each playthrough is followed by an in-depth review of the game that's full of spoilers. So those are good to watch after you've played the game yourself and you want to see how someone else did. The 5 games that I'll be ranking today are The Cabin, The Body Farm, Lamplight Theater, The Inheritance, and A Dark and Stormy Night. But I'll spend most of my time talking about the Deadbolt Mystery Society system in general. There are a lot more than these 5 games to look forward to if you like them, and I'll talk about why you might or might not. So what are these games from the Deadbolt Mystery Society? Some people call these escape room type games. They're puzzle games. Most of your time is spent working on one puzzle at a time. But there's a narrative thread going through them that sort of motivate you and starts you off and then wraps you up at the end with an epilogue to explain the mystery. These games tend to feature a large variety of puzzles, as many as they can fit in. Some of them are visual and spatial, some of them are mathematical, logic, constraint-based, some are ciphers. Basically, in every box you can expect to get a mixture, but they're puzzles. Almost all of your time spent on these games are spent working with physical photographs and cards and sheets. There is an online component, but it's minimal. I'll come back to that. Occasionally, you'll get a box that has a little bit of multimedia, either in audio or video, but it really is kept minimal. But you will need an internet connection to play. The narrative in these games are a little bit different than most of the narratives you'll find in sort of detective and puzzle games, in that they're fairly adult. The game's recommended age is 13 and up, but there's a lot of murder and serial killer stuff in here. And I do think it has an appeal for people who want a more adult narrative. Structurally, these games vary, the different boxes vary, but one common trope in many of these boxes is a crime has been committed, typically a murder, and you have a bunch of suspects, say 6 or 8, and each puzzle will eliminate one of them. So they don't all follow that formula, but many of them do. Now, a quick warning before I talk about what I like and what I don't like. These are extremely subjective types of games. All of these mystery and puzzle games, different groups want different levels of difficulty and puzzle styles, and sometimes just the mood you come in or whether you're on the same wavelength as the author will determine whether any particular box is harder or easier for you. So just because I think a box is best doesn't mean your group might not find it too easy or struggle with it. Very hard to predict, although I'll come back to difficulty levels later on. All of these mystery games do benefit from coming in with low expectations and coming in at least as a group more than just playing solo. They can all be played solo. In general, these kinds of games, though, are going to be considerably more difficult if you play them solo. So just keep that in mind when you're thinking about difficulty levels. Okay, let's talk about the Deadbolt Mystery Society, the company, what these games are. This company was started in 2018 by 2 brothers, Jason and Sean Brannon. It's a subscription-based service. meaning that the primary way they want you to purchase these is to sign up for a yearly subscription and get a new box every month. There are a couple of companies that do this. Very few companies that manage to deliver a box every month for years, and Deadbolt Mystery Society is one of them. They've been running since 2018, early 2018, and they've produced about 60 boxes or so, one each month, that you can get if you sign up by subscription. But you can also buy one-off boxes. They all come in this size box. This larger box you see is just an old packaging. You can actually get this episode, this box, The Cabin, in a newer version, and if you ordered it now new, it would come in this box. There's also an active Facebook group for this channel, and the company is going strong, and you'll see, I'll talk about sort of the writing style and personality of this company. It's very well established, and it has its own style. We'll talk about that. As I said, there aren't that many companies that are able to produce this much content, this consistently. The chief competitor, which I'll come back to, is Hunt a Killer, which has a slightly different focus. But I'll come back to some of the strong points of buying games through this company in a little bit. So to sum up quickly what you can expect if you buy a game from the Deadbolt Mystery Society. They're escape room style games, which means puzzles with a little bit of narrative thread. The difficulty ranges, I'd say, a little bit on the easier side, but different boxes have different difficulty levels and they're rated so you know what you're getting. Length of play, you should probably expect somewhere between 2 and 5 hours per box, depending on whether you get on the right wavelength. We're going to open one of these boxes up and look at it, but they're fairly sort of low down on the ladder of the range of props and components you get in these kinds of games, which probably isn't surprising for a company that's putting out a new box every month. So maybe a little bit on the cheaper generic side and minimal side on props, but they make up for that in the quality of the writing and mysteries, I think. They all require the use of internet, and they all make use of QR codes, which means you'll need a tablet or a phone with a camera to scan the QR code, which brings you to a website, which frequently opens a PDF file. We'll talk about that in a second. But 99% of your time will be spent dealing with physical documents, which we'll look at. Very little time spent online. The story writing quality of these games are really top-notch, and the authors have a voice. It's recognizable, it's set in a world that's recognizable, and it's very competently done, and slightly adult, ages 13 and up. Okay, let's open up one of these boxes to take a look at what you get typically in a box. So it's a fairly generous box, but they are almost all mostly empty. I've yet to see a box that is filled more than a quarter full of items, but let's take a look at what you might get in a typical box. This does not normally come in the box, but you can download for every box a list of contents. You don't end up destroying anything, so you could repackage it to sell it or give it away. And you can download these lists for every box telling you exactly what's inside the box. It's not uncommon to get a box that's organized into sections. This one is organized into 4 sections, a sort of loose collection, and then these different bags, which all tell you you can open these at any time. So they're just there for organizational purposes. They're not typically staged. But some of the boxes occasionally will say, don't open this until you're told to. But most of them have this sticker on it that says open anytime. So I'm not showing you anything that you wouldn't see the moment you open the box. So let's just take a look. We'll walk through this very quickly so you have an idea. As a little trinket here. This is common of these boxes. Some of them have none of them, but it's frequent that each box has one cheap little tiny little trinket. They come with this collectible card, which is quite popular among the people who play this series regularly. You could sort of give away the game, but keep the card to remind you of the case you played, a little bit of the lore of the case. A generic instruction sheet, which is the same for every box. It basically tells you how to play, tells you should solve everything, tells you how to use QR codes, tells you that different pieces may combine. We'll talk about that in a second, and point you to the Facebook group if you get stuck. Then it's very common for these boxes to have a little briefing, which sort of is your call to adventure. This is the call for how you got hired and brought in. And there's recurring entities in this world. This is all set in a fictional world, but you'll meet the same people in different boxes. And a common one is you work for a detective agency. And this just sets up the case for you, your motivation and what has happened, how you're supposed to, what your job is supposed to be. And then we just get a bunch of pieces of evidence. And let's just quickly walk through them so you see it's very common for these to be single-sided. We've got some glossy paper stock, which is common. And then occasionally you'll get a more highly produced little brochure. And then you'll get cardstock in several different sizes. Again, you can see not uncommon for some of these to be only single-sided here. And then you'll get something like this, which basically says when you finish the entire case, here's the question you have to answer, and you would scan this QR code, which would open up an encrypted PDF where you'd have to put in the answer to unlock the end of the game. So there's almost always one card that says when you figured everything out, then you'll know this answer and you'll go to this. And then you'll get a bunch of other cards, some of which will be clearly a puzzle to solve, and some of which will look like this, where there's a QR code but no instructions on how to solve this puzzle. So sometimes you'll solve this and you'll get an encrypted PDF file which you'll have to put in an answer, but more frequently, if it's not clearly a puzzle, you would scan this and you might get some extra information. Occasionally you'll go to a website, a small one-off website, which tells you something. And then this would be a better example of a puzzle. What are the 6 digits needed to access the car? You'd scan this. It'd open a PDF where the password is the 6 digits. Now, this is not a self-contained puzzle, that you'll have to make use of some other information to solve this puzzle. We'll come back to that. This is fairly common in the games. We've got a list of our cards for each of our suspects here. And on the back, we've got a little bit of interview with each suspect. Now, unlike a narrative detective game where you might be expected to really study these and look for contradictions and try to catch people in lies or try to put together timelines, in this game, that doesn't happen very often. This is mostly just for flavor, but you might find an occasional thing mentioned in an interview that's useful. More commonly, though, it's just to give you some atmosphere and to let you put a face to a name. And as I said before, frequently the way the entire mystery is set up is that each puzzle will rule out a suspect until you're left with just one. Here we have, again, an envelope you can open at any time. It's just more puzzles in their own little envelope. Thematically, the game does explain where these came from. But these are just, you can see there's a little bit of a mathematical puzzle, puzzles that are not clear what they are. Again, lots of puzzles like that. Some of them are just single-sided. Some of them will be double-sided and have more information. Again, lots of little puzzles or pieces of puzzles, and I'll talk about the nature of these puzzles in a little bit after we finish looking at all this. Here is just for thematic fun. Some of these are organized into a little evidence thing. This is presumably thematically from the police. So we start out with a police report here. And again, these are meant to be opened at any time. Couple more interviews with little puzzles. This one has a puzzle. You can only open it when you know some information. Here's 3 photographs, single-sided. Here's another example of something that's not a puzzle, but you would scan this and you'd open a web page. Or maybe you'd figure out the puzzle from this. We didn't write on this. This started written out, so you don't have to worry about being shown anything. And so there you have it. That's a look. This is fairly typical of what you'd get in each box. Some boxes may have a little more or less than others. The Deadbolt Mystery Society also does publish an occasional mini mystery, which I don't think I would recommend. There you have it. There's the contents of a box, just to give you some idea. Now, as I said, I think compared to other companies, these are probably on the cheaper, more generic side in terms of props and evidence. But that also means they can keep the prices down. So sometimes if you find like a handwritten note, it'll be clearly a computer font, etc. If the thing that you like most, and if you're playing with a group where you're playing once a year and you just want the most highest production, most believable, realistic, complicated props, and you're willing to spend an unlimited amount for that, then this is not the company for you. These are all sort of small, couple-hour-long boxes with minimal props. So I have been very pleasantly surprised by the quality of this experience in these boxes, the experience of solving the puzzles. And it does feel to me like the 2 brothers behind the Deadbolt Mystery Society have sort of mastered a certain style of puzzle game here that works exceptionally well. And I've tried to think about exactly why is that? What is the secret ingredient of these boxes that make them a step above many of the others? And for me, I think it boils down to 3 basic ideas here that sort of distinguishes these games from many puzzle-based games of this sort, escape room games. The first one is sort of this use of what you might call bottlenecking and nonlinear puzzles, which is you open a box up and it's not that you're given one puzzle. You're not given puzzle number 1 and you sit down with the card that's puzzle one and figure it out. Instead, you open this box and you've got a whole bunch of puzzles in front of you. And it's not clear where to start. Sometimes the game will give you a little hint like start here, but often you're sort of faced with a bunch of possibilities and you don't know quite where to start. But more than that, not every puzzle is solvable with the information you have. So it's sort of like a text adventure game where you might have lots of different branches you could go down, and some of them depend on others. And part of the meta puzzle that you're working with is, of these things in front of us, which one can we attack? Which one is vulnerable to attack? Which one do we have enough information to attack? And then when you solve that one, you scan the QR code and you get a PDF, an encrypted PDF to put in the password for. The answer to the puzzle is the password. And then you get a very short little page, which gives you some narrative flavor of what you've just solved. And it might very well give you another little clue for one of the remaining puzzles in front of you. But it's not going to say this is a clue for puzzle 6. It'll just give you some more information. And then you've got a little more to work with so that you can re-examine everything in front of you and say, what does that help? What puzzle might that help? And maybe it doesn't even help anything yet. And that non-linearity, where you've got this meta puzzle of figuring out what you can attack next, is some of the most enjoyable parts of this experience. But it goes a little bit further than that, because puzzles aren't self-contained in these boxes. So for example, you get these cards out okay, these photographs, and they're not puzzles in and of themselves. It doesn't tell you how to use them. It doesn't give you an assignment to figure out. They're just pieces of evidence. They're components for use in solving another puzzle. And one of the most enjoyable parts of these boxes is getting something like this and saying, what does this go with? How do I use this? What other puzzle is this for? And so you've got this sort of multi-stage solution of these puzzles. First, you're just trying to put together what goes with what puzzles are incomplete, what puzzles do we not have enough to solve, and then how do I combine these pieces to solve a puzzle? And that's very well done. It's done over and over in all of these boxes. It's like a formula, but it's an especially effective formula. What else is special about this? I guess the other thing which I already mentioned is that every time you solve a puzzle, you're coming up with sort of a keyword or phrase that you use to open up a PDF file. But the other thing that that does is that it lets the authors control sort of the order with the sort of multiple acts for the experience. So like the first act, there might be 3 puzzles that could be solved in any order, but in solving them, you'll get little narrative snippets that advance the storyline that let you proceed to the next act and the next act. And because of that, you're getting this very nice pacing where you're getting little drips of the story and the narrative, sometimes even a little twist that happens, an event that happens. Someone might get killed halfway through, but it's the ability to control the narrative and give you doses of it spread throughout that makes it for a consistently enjoyable experience. It's not just pure puzzle solving. It's solve 1 or 2 puzzles in an order you figure out, then you unlock a little bit more story, then you can solve a couple more puzzles, and it gives you this trajectory of feeling like a little mastery over the case, and each time you're getting some of the evidence out of the way with the harder puzzles are sort of boiled down to that's all you're left with is the little ultimate final puzzle at the end. It's paced very well. It's a combination of formula that really makes for a satisfying experience in all of these boxes. Let's talk a little bit more about the narrative element, the storytelling element of these games. I do think that this company has sort of created their own little niche of more adult style storylines in these games compared to something like Hunt a Killer and many other game companies, which are much more family focused. Here we do have, these games feel like they're set in a horror world, like a Stephen King world. There are a lot of serial killers in a lot of these games. Not all of them. Some of them are not about murder, but many of them are. Many of them are about serial killers and some gruesome killings. There is a real world building here. I'm not sure I've seen that in another company, at least not as wholeheartedly embraced. Here there are real characters that return case after case, and real places and real locations in this fictional world. And it does feel like a sort of Stephen King world building stuff. If you like that kind of thing, if you really buy into if you like horror movies and you buy into the Stephen King idea of a world being built and certain personalities, you might find something to really like in this series. And then I've already talked about how well I think everything is paced out. It sort of feels like you're playing games created by people who are experienced in how to pace a horror movie, how to have twists and how important they are, and how much to reveal at each stage, and how much tension and how much ambiguity to leave. You sort of feel like you're in the hands of skilled writers who know how to set the stage to have a fun and exciting horror adventure. You almost feel like you're in little horror movies with these games. let's continue talking about sort of commonalities between the boxes and this company. So I've already told you can subscribe to their service or you can buy these one-off boxes. For every box, you can go online and see a list of the contents of that box when they release a new edition of it. Doesn't happen often, but they've been going since 2018, and I guess they've re-released some of their 2018 boxes and made some improvements and changes. You can see the different versions. The old versions are still online. For each box, you can download a PDF hint file and a solution file, as well as the contents of each box. So really, for every box you can buy, going back to 2018, there's solutions, there's hints, and there's contents of each box. All still supported, very impressively done. Everything has a low-tech sort of bargain basement feel. Everything's on PDF files, but it all works. It all does, and it all probably appeals to people who are low-tech interested, aren't looking for fancy stuff, but are looking for a company committed to supporting their content. And I've already said there's an active Facebook group discussing these cases. If you got stuck, you could go on there and ask for help, and you would get help. There's also a nice PDF listing every box that's been released so far, a summary description of it, a couple paragraphs, and a difficulty rating. And it's actually quite nicely done in that when they release a box, they're not sure what the difficulty level is. So they rely on users to fill out polls and rate the difficulty levels. So if you buy a brand new box, it might not be rated for difficulty yet, but if you buy a box that's a year old, you will get a fairly reliable difficulty rating for it, typically between 6 and 8 or 6 or 9. Again, your mileage may vary. I don't know how much weight you should put into the difficulty levels, but it's a nice way of doing it. They also have their users vote on their favorite boxes of each year. Some of these were voted. I think Dark and Stormy Night here and The Cabin were voted some of the best of the year. We'll talk about that in a second. It's a minor thing, but I found that board game players, consumers, tend to have a little bit of OCD in common. And one of the things you'll notice for many of these mail order games that you can only buy this from the website. You can't buy this at Amazon. You subscribe or buy directly from the website. It's very common for these games to be shipped in sort of a brown generic box that you wouldn't want to put on your shelf. And these actually look kind of nice. They're all in a standard box size, so they fit very well on the shelf. They all have their different cover. There's nothing, super fancy about all these, but they look nice and they just sit well. They're nice to show off. There's nothing there's nothing bad about the way these look. And they each have a collectible card if you're into that kind of thing. And there are frequently sales on the Deadbolt Mystery Society website. Sales of individual boxes, sales of bundles. I'm going to come back to that when I give you my final thoughts on whether I think these games are worth it. Okay, before I rank the boxes and give you some more final thoughts on this, let me talk about some of the negatives of these sets. First negative is that it does absolutely require the internet and a phone to scan the QR codes. I said before, you really will spend 99% of your time working with physical material. So I think for people who want an analog experience, this really does mainly get you that. But you cannot just bring it in a car and play it without a phone and internet. The company really leaned heavily into this idea of encrypted PDF files. So every puzzle is scan a QR code, it downloads a PDF file, you have to put in a password for that. The answer to the puzzle is the password. It does work, but it's a little awkward. Occasionally, it's a little too easy to put in the wrong answer and just have it say, can open file. And there are some issues with the company occasionally naming the PDF files in a way that leaks information. Whether it's a reasonable trade-off, I'm not sure, but you get used to it. one tip would be find yourself a good PDF reader that can save files and drop the password. One thing that happened to us quite frequently when we played is you'd solve a puzzle, download a PDF file that wants a password, you open it up in your browser, you look at it, then later you want to come back to that puzzle and you forget what PDF file it was, and then it'll make you try to put in the password again, which you've forgotten the exact answer to the puzzle. It can be a little frustrating. So either print out the PDFs after you download them or keep them open in a tab and save them as unencrypted. The other thing that sort of jumps out when you play these games is sort of the lesser quality of, not the props are fairly minimal and generic, but also the art and the cards. They are not going and staging elaborate crime scenes and taking photographs of them. It's quite common to be playing this game and you'll hear about people sitting around a table in a cabin and you look at the puzzle and it's just like a piece of clip art of a modern office table. And so there are some disconnects like that, or something's supposed to be handwritten and it's clearly like a generic computer font. Those are sort of the design trade-offs and the decisions made throughout most of these games. And you have to be able to overlook that, or that at least has to be not the thing that's important for you. For me, I'm completely fine with that. I'd rather have my money go into the quality of the mysteries and the writing than into the props and the art. But that's just for me. The other thing I would say as a con, and this is more of a substantial one, is that these can feel, some of them at least, a little bit short, sort of like they're snacks. And sometimes they feel arbitrarily short, like there'll be a setup that's awfully compelling, and you're like, I want to spend some real time solving this mystery, but it's clear that the designers just, they have to put out one each month. They can't put too much content in any one box. So you sort of, just when you're getting started, it's over and it feels like, all right, well, if they weren't having to produce one per month, they would spend a little bit more time working on this. The story might be richer. There might be more involved. So I guess if I had anything that I would wish for, it's that they might do more continuing series where they didn't feel compelled to make each standalone box its own little self-contained short tiny snack experience, and maybe they could plan out, here's a 6-month continuing story that they could really take their time with. Okay, let's rank the games finally. I would put these 5 games into 3 tiers. For me, the first tier is The Cabin and The Body Farm. To me, these were the best overall experiences with some real creepy feel of being in a horror movie. A very compelling backstory and continuing story with events that are happening. Twists and turns, cool characters, and unpredictability, a little sense of dread, and nice mix of puzzles with some difficult ones. That would be my first tier. The Cabin and the Body Farm. Again, if you bought this new, it would come in the same size box. Tier 2, I would put The Inheritance and The Lamplight Theater, Death at the Lamplight Theater. This would be my tier 2. Both of these are sort of not, these are getting away from the serial killer, heavy-duty murder horror themed games, but still interesting interpersonal relationships, a nice mix of some cool, interesting puzzles, sort of a medium length, maybe a little bit shorter than Body Farm and The Cabin, but still enough to sink your teeth into. And then I would put at the third tier, the least favorite of still ones that I liked, would be Dark and Stormy Night, which is a little weird because this is rated as one of the boxes of the year for 2019. So The Cabin and the Body Farm are 2018-2019, Inheritance and Lamplight 2021, and 2020. So wide range of years. And then Dark and Stormy Night was way back into 2019. So I don't think you can predict my rankings, at least based on when they were released. We just felt that Dark and Stormy Night had a great setup, but then sort of a real letdown afterwards in terms of feeling shorter, easier, not as meaty, not as much to sink your teeth into, cared less about the characters and the people, just the least engaging of all of these. But again, your mileage may vary. So 60 boxes in total that this company has produced so far, one a month for the last 5 years, and they're still producing them. So you might ask, if you're interested in this, if I've intrigued you enough about this series, that you might want to pick up some of these boxes. A good question is, which box is going to be right for you? Well, you could start with the ones that I rank as my tier 1 best boxes, but let me give you some little bit more specific advice. First of all, I tend to buy quite a few games used on eBay. If these games do not require destruction of elements the way many escape room puzzle games do, so you'd be fairly safe buying them on eBay. However, buying them used on eBay, I should say. However, the one thing I would caution you about is that if the company has released revised edition of some of these boxes, you really want to make sure you're getting the most recent edition. And a good way to find out that, if you are inclined to buy these games used, is to go on the Deadbolt Mystery Society website, look for their contents lists, and see if for any given game there's a revised version like there is for the cabin, and try to pick up the revised version. There are improvements made. The other reason why buying them used on eBay is a little less appealing than many games is that these games are fairly cheap. And you can't get too much of a discount on eBay. So if you subscribe to them, if you subscribe to this service, you do end up paying something like $30 per, is it $30? It's about $30 a month if you subscribe, when you include shipping. Now, I think that's too high for my taste to pay for what these are, because they're shorter, on the shorter side. But they regularly go on sale at the Deadbolt Mystery Society website for as low as $12, $13. They go from $12, $13 to $25, $26, and frequently hover around the $20 point. And I think for $20, it's a reasonable purchase, especially if you buy a bunch of them at once. You're saving on shipping. So my sort of advice to you is to find reviews, find some boxes that are highly, if you're just getting started, find some reviews that have boxes that you think are good. I'm going to give you a pointer to a review site I recommend. Or download the master list of every box released and read the ones that thematically appeal to you. And then wait for it to come on sale on the Deadbolt Mystery Society website, which also sells bundles. And if you're just new to this, you might buy a couple bundles of 4 games for $50 or whatever. So I've accumulated now a couple dozen of these boxes, and my strategy is I wait for them to go on sale. If they go on sale for less than $20, then I'll buy them if I can buy enough to save on shipping. So if you're a little bit of a cheapskate like me, that might be the way to go. The site I want to recommend for finding reviews of these boxes is the Escape Room Adventurer website, which is https://escapeadventurer.com, all one word. And they have reviewed a lot of these boxes, and I've been playing the ones that they consider to be the best. And that's how I'm doing it. That's a reasonable way you might want to consider doing it. Okay, final thoughts. These are extremely well done, sort of bite-sized narrative puzzle escape room games. I am a big fan. For my money, they hit the sweet spot in the trade-off between production quality and mystery narrative quality. For me, I prefer these to Hunt a Killer, which seems to really lean heavily on production quality and feels like they don't quite have their handle on how to make these games fun to play the way Deadbolt Mystery Society does. The narrative voice here does feel like feels quite special. Like there's a skilled hand, a consistently good, deft hand writing the narrative behind these cases, and it feels like sort of a good quality horror thriller movie. I like the adult tilt to these games, the horror killers, sort of like I play a lot of these detective mystery games, and most of them don't have that flavor. So when you're ready, when you want a hardcore mystery, scary serial killer theme, this company seems to do it exceptionally well. For me, though, the real bottom line, the real key part here is the formula they've come up with for these puzzles that I talked about at length that has to do with multiple components for each puzzle that you're not sure what goes with what. The non-linear nature of these puzzles where you've got a bunch of puzzles, you could work on each of them in any order, except that some of them you won't have enough to solve, and so figuring out which puzzles are the easiest for you to attack is part of maybe the most enjoyable part. And then the fact that this narrative element comes out a little bit, drips a little bit at a time as you solve each puzzle with this minimal use of the internet really just hits the sweet spot and makes for a compelling, well-paced experience. My caveats for these games, though, are that these are on the smaller, shorter, lighter side, sometimes on the easier side. They are not as satisfyingly engrossing in terms of a long experience as some of the best mystery detective games we've played, where you're staring at a dense document over and over again, looking for little details to pull out. These are puzzle games. There's very little sort of induction, deduction the way you would get if you played Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective or the adventure document dump games. These are a real niche puzzle. Puzzle is the focus here. I think also a little bit of a knock on these games is how straightforward the formula is occasionally in terms of here's 6 suspects and each puzzle is just going to say, here's the person that didn't do it. And sometimes we've played these and we've been like, well, on what basis? Who's telling me this person didn't do it? I'm not getting any evidence that they didn't do it. I'm just being told, solve this puzzle. And when I put the letters together, it tells you who to rule out. So there can be some unsatisfying elements of these puzzles that happen. And that's, again, in contrast to some of these detective games where in a detective game, like, for example, the adventure games, some of the document dump games, the hidden games series, you can see some of my other videos. In those cases, the way you would rule out a suspect is you'd find and understand the evidence that proves they didn't do it. Whereas here, you could get a puzzle that just says, here's the name of the person who you can rule out and didn't do it. It won't tell you why. You didn't find any evidence about why. It's just solving the puzzle gave you that answer. And then the last piece of whether this is right for you or wrong for you is the cost. From my standpoint, I think if you can find these for under $20, they're great boxes. They give you $20 worth of enjoyment. Think of it as going to a movie. So 2 people, it costs you less than going to the movies. I think it hits a sweet spot there. It's an enjoyable. For me, I would not subscribe at $30 a month. I think at that cost, it's pushing it. It's on the high side for that one-time experience. And also, if you're subscribing, you're sort of getting whatever box comes out next. You're not buying the best boxes or the boxes you care about next. Of course, if you're chewing through these once a month, that could be fun, waiting for the new box to come in the mail. So your mileage may vary. I do think, though, that not all the boxes are going to be winners. You have to prepare yourself for that. All right, I hope this video has been useful to you. I'll probably put out, since I will be playing through more of the Deadbolt Mystery Society games, I'll put out these as I play through 5 at a time. These were all purchased by myself. I have no relationship with the company. You do with that information as you will. If you like this video and want to see more videos like this, please consider subscribing and give this video a thumbs up. Better yet, if you've played these games, I'd love to hear what you thought. Which games are your favorite? If you know of some other websites that are reviewing these games, feel free to link to them. You can find reviews of these games on YouTube. If you are a YouTube reviewer and you've been reviewing these games, feel free to post a link to your channel. And I'll see you next time.